piece of hiveware is the feeder. Normally we would feed sugar syrup to the bees. It's less common to feed anything else like white sugar or fondant. But there's two main types. One is a frame feeder, which can be different thicknesses. It can be 1, 2 or 3 frames. This is a 2-frame feeder, and for a 3/4 box. It also comes in full depth. So one of the issues with feeding bees sugar syrup is them drowning. So, and also spilling any sugar syrup could incite robbing, which is a serious thing to avoid. So we'll come onto that at another time. But these feeders, if you just have a standard plastic one like this, just shove loads of bracken in, or kikuyu grass or whatever, just jam it in, twigs, anything, just so that the bees can climb out. You could put in wire mesh ladders for them, or you can buy these covers that comes up, and then there's a ladder which is basically a tube with holes in, so the bees can go down and come back up and not drown. Another type of feeder is probably more common, certainly among commercials, is a top feeder. Now this is a homemade one for a nuke, but the principles are the same. The bees come up from below and come up and take the syrup and don't drown. Here, the syrup goes in here, and there's a gap where the syrup will go underneath. And then the bees cannot get out of this area here, and they can use this little ramp to go down and get the honey and the sugar syrup and then go back in. The commercial ones, I'll show you that later, is like a half-depth wooden one with a plastic insert and covers so that to stop the bees getting in, but they can access the sugar syrup. There are other ways of doing it. One is you can get these cost a couple of cents at AliExpress, and you fill sugar syrup through like this, and then this just slides in the entrance. Here. Now the only issue with this is it could get knocked over. It's unlikely, but and also it's quite close to the entrance, so the smell of the sugar could incite other bees to come and start robbing, which, like I said, is a thing to avoid. So this is one way of doing it. Also, this is quite a good water feeder, whereas this also is a good water feeder. It's a similar thing. It's got little holes around the edge, so you can screw that on and stand it up, and water will come out and the bees will be able to get to the water. Now, another interesting way is, I mentioned before, the hive mat with the hole in it. That sits on there, or that way, whichever you prefer, and then so that's on top of the hives, on top of all the supers. Then you put a half depth or a full depth box on top, so you have got that space there. Then you could put a bowl of sugar syrup up there, and that way the bees have access to it, but the other bees don't. So put twigs in there or wire or stuff, fill that full of sugar syrup, sit that in there, and then the bees come up through the hole and come and get the sugar and go back down. Another way to do it is a jar with some holes in, and then you fill it full of sugar syrup, turn it up, and the vacuum there will stop the sugar syrup coming out. But the bees, the little drops, the bees will be able to take in, and it'll slowly just, without dripping, they'll be able to take it. So that can just sit on top of the hole, and they can access it that way. Another way is to get a Ziploc bag or a bag that can be sealed and put sugar syrup in it, and then put lots of holes in it, a couple of holes, and then make sure it's well sealed and lay it on top of the frames, and then the bees will be able to get to the sugar syrup through the holes. That's another way of feeding them. very much against open feeding. You should never feed out in the open because that will incite robbing. And with robbing, they can completely destroy a hive, kill all the bees, and you'll lose all the production. But also, it's a good way of spreading disease. So that's a no-no in New Zealand because the spread of disease is very important to try and stop. Next up is the hive mat. In New Zealand it tends to be called the hive mat, but overseas it tends to be called the crown board or the inner cover, the inner lid. It's basically a solid sheet of some sort of material, usually hardboard, with a 10mm high lip around it, similar to the same height as the base. That goes on top. That way, the reason we use this is, besides ventilation and protection against invaders and stuff like that, is that it helps, the bees will propolise that down, so it needs to be pried off. And if this is on here and that gets propolized down, the actual cover, it would be very difficult to get that off. It is very good for insulation and it has lots of other interesting functions. So this one is a homemade one with just strips of wood glued and stapled onto the cardboard. Then other varieties is, this is a one from Ceracell. It's a hardboard but laminated, some sort of melamine type thing. And then it's got the wood frame, but the wood frame is half lap and it's grooves in there which it slots in. So it's on both sides, the gap. You can use plywood, but be very careful not to use treated or marine ply. And another thing is quite common is to have a hole in the crown board. Now that has lots of different functions that we'll go through later, from putting a feeder on top, or for them cleaning up the trappings, or for helping with ventilation, but we'll go through that. And then another interesting thing to do is one made of perspex. This one's just still got, I've just made these, so I've still got the covers on them. These go on here. These are good for winter because if you don't want to kill your the bees by opening up and having a look, you just want to see how they're doing. You can take the lid off and you can see inside how the bees are doing. It will get propolized up and waxed over time, but if it's airtight, then and there's no light shining through, then it's less likely. It'll do you for quite a few seasons. And there's other things that we can do with that. And then the lid. On top is the lid. These are homemade wooden ones that sit on, slightly larger, so they give a bit of space. And then usually what we do is put a brick on top to hold it down so the wind doesn't get underneath it. This is very useful, but the most common, which I don't have at the moment, which we'll be showing you soon, is the galvanised tin ones which fit on, and they're called telescopic because the two ends are sprung on so it holds on in place. Now the advantage of those is that certainly if you've got them several hives on a pallet, or you're transporting them, or you want them close together, with a lid like this, they can't go close together, but with a telescopic lid or a galvanised lid, they will be, there's only very small gaps, they'll be quite snug next to each other. One of the problems with the metal lids is the transfer of heat. They lose the heat in the winter and gain the heat in the summer. So that is one of the things that you've got to be wary of, and that's where a good hive mat will come in. But those things tend to be more important for commercials, whereas for a hobbyist, you could make your own gabled roof, which is quite good. It has good insulation and you can airflow through. You can have the gaps in there. You can fill it full of straw for the winter to keep it warm and help absorb the moisture, and it does look very attractive. One of the drawbacks of the gabled roof is that when you're doing your hives, what you do is you take off the lid and put it upside down next to the hive. So when you're clearing off the boxes, you stack them on top of there, and that way any bees that drop down will drop down into the lid and not onto the grass, especially if by mistake you put the queen in there. And then any bees that are left in there, you can just shake into the hive and brush off, and they're all back in there. Okay, another type of hive is a nuke, short for a nucleus. Now this is where you will probably get your first bees in something like this, which will hold frames inside, and you can buy these from Ceracell or from Ecrotech, and they are in a sheet of core flute, and you fold them up and you put a few bits on and you make it. It's got ventilation at the back, and it's got a gate at the front, which you can dial round so that the bees can all come and go, or you could put the queen excluder on so that just the queen, all the bees except the queen and the drones can come in and out, or just a breathing hole, so just for ventilation, but no bees can come in or out. So you can just dial that round. And then it comes in 3/4 height and full depth. They come in different sizes, usually 5 or 6. You can quite easily make your own out of plywood. There are instructions on the internet, and then you just buy these little gates which you can once again just dial round to fully open, queen excluder or breathing. Put a few air holes at the back, maybe a bit of mesh on the base, and then a tight fitting lid. And these are used for transporting bees, collecting swarms and doing splits and transporting queens. So that is the nukes. Now there are other types of hives besides wood ones which are less common. There's one that's called the paradise hive, which is made with polystyrene. Now this is a nuke. So it's slightly smaller, but this is sometimes used for breeding as well. So it's thick polystyrene, hardened polystyrene, and this one has a mesh base, but also this one you could use for, you could either put in 6 frames, or you could open this side up, put a board in the middle and open this side up, and then you can make it into 2 separate hives facing different ways. And this one comes with a feeder that goes on top and a lid. Now over here I've got some full size ones. The whole structure, the whole setup is the same as Langstroth, except it's made of polystyrene and it has some hardened plastic edges to help open up, but it has a different type of base, more like the Hive Doctor base, and the lid on top.